If you've loved the New Orleans Saints for a while, you know that there have been some special teams when it comes to this squad. But 2022 might just be one of the most special yet. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of Locked On Saints, which is presented today by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a daily fantasy app made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players. Then all you have to do is pick whether or not they're going to score above or below their projected Prize Picks projections, and that will allow you to win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. Just use the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Big shout out to everybody who is here for yet another live episode of Locked On Saints. Good morning. Hope you brought your coffee. Hold on. I brought my coffee with me here, so cheers to you. Thank you for coming out for another episode of Locked On Saints. I see y'all in the live chat right now. Drop those your team every day. I see you, Nick. I see you, Nixo, as well. Corey, thank you very much for catching us live here for the first time. And of course, if you're listening later, all the same information, all the great stuff that we've got here on the live stream as well. So I appreciate all the continued support here as we continue our two-a-days here at Locked On Saints. So to get us started today, I want to start off with a conversation that I think is one that a lot of people are having right now, because yesterday, the 29th, marked the 17-year anniversary of sort of the first impact of Hurricane Katrina. And while talking about Hurricane Katrina isn't necessarily something that I have really still become completely comfortable with, especially in an environment like this where I'm essentially like on my own. I'm not talking to somebody about it and bouncing off of somebody and stuff like that. It's hard for me to talk about, right? So I think that the reason why I highlight that, though, is that we're coming off of the 17-year anniversary from yesterday, and it reminds you of how special this New Orleans Saints team is and how special this team, the connection between the team and the community are, right? 2006, people were talking about the team potentially moving to San Antonio, all of that. Then all of a sudden, they go from being this fan base that was just waiting for something good to happen, but then is coming out of sort of this reconstruction, this rebirth of its own post-Katrina, and then that matched up immediately with the rebirth of the New Orleans Saints. I know I was dealing with a whole bunch of stuff during this time. I had just had brain surgery. A very close friend of mine had just been, passed away due to a drunk driving accident. There was just a bunch of stuff that kind of happened all in that area. And I don't want to get to a place where we're like being Debbie Downers or I'm being a Debbie Downer or anything like that, right? What I'm trying to do instead is celebrate and highlight the fact that this New Orleans Saints team is special, this community is special, and this global fan base is special. And I think that this New Orleans Saints team in 2022 has the ability and capability to be special as well, just like the team that we talked about in 2006, just like the team we talked about in 2009, 2010 that won a Super Bowl, 2011 that set all of the records, 2018, 2017 that were both so close. This 2022 team has everything that it needs to be special going into this NFL season. And I think not only can they, but I think that they will be. Regardless of what the final record is by the end of the season, this team has a lot of ways that it connects to its community. And one of the ways that you're seeing it this year is with the addition of guys like Tyrann, Mathieu, and Jarvis, Landry. These are guys that lived through the exact same experiences that we're highlighting right now because we're 17 years removed from it. They were here for it, right? They were impacted by it. These are players that now represent this organization that also represent the community. Same thing for a Destrehan native in Kirk Merritt. Same thing for a New Orleans native in Dejon Dixon, right? There are so many of these different pieces that just make so much sense for this New Orleans Saints team. And then you look at Jameis Winston, who, look, is one of the most storied quarterbacks in the NFL, for better or for worse, since coming into the NFL, and even before, right? The storylines that followed him into college or followed him out of college, right? There's a whole bunch of that. There's a whole bunch of those pieces all over this team. Michael Thomas, the story of him fighting to get back, and all of the sort of tumultuous relationship that either was or wasn't with the New Orleans Saints that continued to get, highlighted in all of that. You look at, players like Tyrann Mathieu, I guess, is the other one too, who was one of the best safeties in the NFL, but has played for 4 different teams now and has been all over, sort of traversing that. You've got Alvin Kamara, who is somebody that is just like one of those star quality players that represents the community and represents the team that he plays for so, tremendously in terms of what he does on the field. I know he's got the legal issues off the field right now that have to be taken care of and have to be dealt with, but just think about who Alvin Kamara is on a daily basis in terms of what he has been to this franchise and to this team, particularly coming in with that 2017 draft class, which, by the way, you want to talk about something special. That 2017 draft class was one of those special pieces, along with Ryan Ramczyk, so on and so forth. So there's so many different pieces here that allow this New Orleans Saints team to be healthy. And I'm going to agree with Corey in the chat right here that there's so much about this team to really be excited about, and that health is kind of that next piece, as Gage highlights. So I think that that's a huge piece that you're looking at for this team as well. Can they stay healthy to kind of rebound off of this weird year that they had in 2021? And if they rebound off that weird year that they had in 2021 with 58 different starters, 4 different quarterbacks, 4 different kickers, all of those things, and still winning 9 games, and they come back into 2022 and they're a playoff team with Dennis Allen at the helm, then all of a sudden you're talking about a special team. You're talking about a special coach, right? A first-year head coach taking a non-playoff team to the playoffs. That's Coach of the Year conversation, at least, for Dennis Allen. Now, I'm not saying go put your money down on a Coach of the Year when it comes to Dennis Allen over at BetOnline, but I am just saying that, that puts him in that conversation, right? So there's so many of those different pieces. So with all of that, I just wanted to kind of highlight that this New Orleans Saints team in 2022 has all the makings of being a special team, and one of the most special teams that we have seen from this organization since the 2006-2009 seasons, along with those teams that are like the ones in 2011, 2018, all of that. So I do think absolutely that they are in a very, very good place. And a part of that, Curtis here has just asked about any word on this Tyrann Mathieu thing. I cannot stress how much that is a non-story. Like Tyrann Mathieu reacting to a cut that happened on his former team, it's a non-story. So again, this team is special, and you're going to see like little things to where, national media is going to try to pick and, prod at small things like the Tyrann Mathieu tweet to try to change the narrative around the New Orleans Saints and try to go back to this place of look how dysfunctional they are, all that. I'm in the building every day. Nick Underhill is in the building every day. Kat Terrell is in the building every day. There are several people that are in the building every day who will tell you that this New Orleans Saints team is not in any type of feeling of dismay or any type of situation of turmoil. This team is ready to play, and this team is ready to win in 2022. All right, coming up next, I want to dive into a look at the roster here. You've seen some roster cuts already getting started today. We'll update on all those at the end of the day. But this could be something different, because one of the things that makes the New Orleans Saints so special over the years has been that they have been a prime destination for undrafted free agents. But could this year be the first year in a long time that not a single undrafted free agent makes the roster? It's possible, but I'll tell you who's got the best shot as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And before we get to that, I get the great opportunity to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, which you can sign up for over at prizepicks.com. They're daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 5 players before the weekend's matchup if you're doing the NFL side, and you basically just pick more or less based upon their projections. You can even do season-long things. Like right now, Jameis Winston, if you think he's going to throw for more than 3,750 passing yards, you can take you can take the over on that and then submit that and end up winning up to 10 times your entry. You just got to pick 2 to 5 different players. You can kind of go all out to where you got to get all of them right, and that's what gets you the biggest payout, or you can even kind of hedge down a little bit to where you get like 1 or 2 wrong, but then you still end up getting a nice payout. So really, really cool stuff over at PrizePicks. I love that this is the way that daily fantasy should be played, in my opinion, as opposed to the whole like spreadsheet wizards and all that stuff. Like I'm telling y'all, I can't compete with the nerds. So this is a lot of fun here, and this is what I really like. So go and check them out. You can do it by downloading the PrizePicks app or going to prizepicks.com today to sign up so that you can play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. You see it right here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. That means that if you deposit $100, they'll match with $100. If you deposit $50, then they'll give you $50. So all the way up to $100 there. Don't forget, that's promo code LOCKEDON to sign up for the instant deposit match of up to $100 over at PrizePicks.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. I appreciate y'all so much for being here with us for another episode and for this live episode here on YouTube. Whether you're watching live or you're listening later, I appreciate you very much for being here. So the New Orleans Saints are now in a situation here to where things could be a little bit different going into the 2022 roster when it comes to these 53-man breakdowns, because they could be in a situation where they're not actually keeping any undrafted free agents on the roster. This New Orleans Saints team and depth chart is so deep that they may actually not end up keeping one for the first time in a very long time. So here's why I say that. Look at the kind of keynote undrafted free agents and then the positions that they play for. We'll start with Dejon Dixon, right, who was one of my favorite and still is one of my favorite undrafted free agents coming in. I think he's going to be what I've said from the very beginning, right? Somebody that could potentially scratch a 53-man roster, but at the very least should be a core and prime practice squad guy that continues to get elevated for those key matchups, mismatches, things like that he can create, especially with his size. So with that piece, you look at the rest of the wide receiver core. If you're keeping 6, it's hard to find a space for him, right? Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, and then you've got your 3 backups who are going to be guys basically like Deontay Hardy, Marquez Callaway, and then maybe Traquan Smith if he's healthy. If not Traquan Smith, then Kirk Merritt feels like an absolute shoo-in to me. In fact, I would put Kirk Merritt above Traquan Smith personally. But that leaves Dejon Dixon over on the outside. Let's look at a couple of other undrafted free agents that have been big-time highlights. Abram Smith, already off the roster. Doesn't look like he's making the final 53. Could potentially be back for the practice squad. That would make a ton of sense for him. You look at guys like Derek Schweiger, maybe, on the offensive line. Lewis Kidd on the offensive line. Hard to find a spot for them. Lewis Kidd could potentially make sense, but it's just going to be a little bit challenging to make the numbers work at tackle when you're probably going to carry Trevor Penning in on the active roster before you put him on injured reserve. Then you're going to have guys like James Hurst, Landon Young, and then, of course, Ryan Ramczyk. There's a lot of players there already, so that could potentially keep him off the roster. So who is, outside of Lewis Kidd, who I think maybe has the most direct path there, once maybe Trevor Penning gets moved to IR, maybe they bring him back, but there's also the opportunity to sign a veteran at the position. So many different ways that the Saints can go there, but James Hurst is going to be your starter, of course, at the beginning of the season. So then the next piece you're looking for is kind of like, where is the next undrafted free agent that could potentially slot into a spot that's available? And really, the only guy that comes to mind is Nephi Sewell, the linebacker out of Utah, undrafted free agent. Now, it's still going to be tough for him, though, because if you're keeping 6 linebackers, you've got your top 3 in Demario Davis, in Pete Werner, who was back at practice yesterday, which was great. And then, of course, Caden Ellis, who's been your starting strong side linebacker for a little bit now. But then behind them, you've got Andrew Dowell. You've got Eric Wilson. You've got John Bostic, Zach Bond, Chase Hansen. It's hard to find a spot where Nephi Sewell leaps 2 of those guys to get into the top 3, or 3 of those guys to get into the top 3. Is there potential? Yes, absolutely, 100%. But it's going to be tough. So this might be one of the first seasons that we've seen in a long time where the New Orleans Saints don't actually have an undrafted free agent that makes the roster. And it's weird. It's different. It's not usually what you're accustomed to. John Parker Romo, he ended up being released already. Rashid Shaheed's another one to watch out for, but considering the fact that the Saints are already so stacked at wide receiver, it's hard to find a place where Rashid Shaheed sticks in. Now, if one of these guys, like a veteran, ends up getting traded, like let's say Nick Vanette gets traded, right? Then all of a sudden, Lucas Krull has a spot to get right back on, to get onto the 53-man roster. If, let's say, Deontay Hardy gets traded, which I don't know is going to be a thing, but if he does, then maybe that opens the door for a Rashid Shaheed. Maybe that opens the door for a Dejon Dixon. But those other moves would have to correspond first before you get to a point where you're talking about any of these UDFA rookies making the roster. So you're going to have guys that are former UDFAs that are going to make the roster. But I don't know right now that you can say with full confidence that an undrafted free agent rookie from the 2022 draft class is going to make the New Orleans Saints roster. That's one of the things that used to make the New Orleans Saints so special, but now what makes the New Orleans Saints so special is that they're so deep that we're now having the conversation that these guys who we used to fight and scrounge for to try to find, okay, who's going to be the one, who's going to be the two to make the roster, because there's always a couple. Now this roster is so good, this roster is so deep, there's a chance that none of them do. And instead, you end up loading up the practice squad with them, which is great because then you're loading up the practice squad with players that spent the entirety of training camp and rookie minis and OTAs and all that with you. They know the system. It's a good place to be, right? You've got guys that are experienced with this year's system right there, ready to go in case you need them. But in terms of making the active roster, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. I mean, really, it's Nephi Sewell and it's Lewis Kidd. Those are probably the two that have the most direct paths to the roster. And then, of course, if something does happen when it comes to, Nick Vanette or one of these other players getting traded, then that certainly opens the door for one of them as well. I'm getting some kind of weird note of an error on YouTube. So if anything weird is happening, let me know in the chat. But if we're good, then I'm just going to keep moving here. So sorry for those of you that are listening to it on the backside or that are watching on the backside that I had to kind of take that break, but just so that all of you know. I don't know exactly what's going on, but we'll figure it out. Coming up next, we're going to dive into what you need to know as the New Orleans Saints 53-man roster continues to take shape going into the big 53-man cutdown at 3 p.m. Central Time today. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode. But first, I have an important message for you. It's never okay to drive stoned. If you feel different, you drive different. And that's not a situation that you want to be in. What's the worst that could happen? Maybe you just drive a little bit below the speed limit. It's no big deal, right? Wrong. It is a big deal because the truth is your reaction time is slower and you put yourself in danger, not just yourself though, but everyone around you, possibly impacting the course of someone else's life, which is going to end up, of course, impacting the course of your own. So don't put yourself in that situation. Don't put anyone else in that situation. Take care of your neighbors. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. So if you've been using marijuana of any form or drugs of any form, honestly, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different, drive high, get a DUI. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Looks like everything's still okay over on this side. Not having any issues here. So I don't know what this note is, but I'm just going to kind of move on past it. So I appreciate y'all very much for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, tomorrow, the 31st, our first episode of the Pro Football Preview 2022 premieres, which you can find over at the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 feed. Just search that on your favorite podcast provider, and of course on Locked On NFL as well. Okay, now this is going to be a day that a lot of people are going to, of course, be paying attention to because by 3 p.m. Central Time, the New Orleans Saints and the rest of the NFL must cut down to their 53-man rosters. So it can be a rough day for some players that are on the bubble. And of course, it's a very interesting and impactful day when it comes to everything that's going on in terms of coverage of this New Orleans Saints team and, of course, the NFL. So as we look at what you need to know going into this 2022 cutdown, let's go ahead and recap what's happened so far and where we've all been going. So the way that you should look at this is that the New Orleans Saints have already made about 20 moves to get down below. We did see one move this morning. I'm double checking to see if there's been anything else from the Saints over the course of the next little bit. And so The big piece here is that Josh Andrews was released this morning. That's an interior offensive lineman that the New Orleans Saints have kind of hung on to, and makes you a little bit curious, right? Are the Saints just set on the offensive interior at this point with guys like Cesar Ruiz and Eric McCoy and Andrus Peat and maybe Nick Martin backing you up, and of course Calvin Throckmorton, who's your versatile interior offensive lineman there? Are they set there, or is there more to be done? Will Nick Martin end up going to and taking up one of those veteran spots on the practice squad? That's kind of the conversation there, so we'll see exactly how all of that pans out. But outside of that, the New Orleans Saints haven't made any other moves today. So the next piece, when you look at all of it, is sort of who are some of the players that have been released that are maybe on waivers that the Saints would have an opportunity at, either as a veteran that they could potentially end up bringing in or a guy that they could potentially try to get over on waivers. And there are a few. Linebacker Jared Davis, linebacker Quincy Roche, tight end O.J. Howard was released by the Bills. If the Saints feel like they still want to add to their tight end group, there's an absolute opportunity for them to do that with a guy like O.J. Howard, who has experience with Jameis Winston, of course, so something to watch there. There's a couple of other offensive tackles that ended up getting released that the Saints have some familiarity with, like a John Leglue, like a Rick Leonard, who's now back on the market, and then of course Kellen Diesch, who was one of my favorite offensive tackles, kind of underrated offensive tackles going into this year's NFL draft class coming out of Arizona State. So he's now on the market. Defensive tackle Ty McGill's on the market. Running backs like Sony Michel and Philip Lindsay are on the market. So there's a lot of different places where the New Orleans Saints can end up going to potentially bring in some additional talent before or after those cutdowns. Some of these guys are going to be veterans who aren't going to be subject to waivers, like a Danny Shelton, for instance, but then there are going to be others that are going to be on waivers that you kind of have to wait to see what happens. So we'll see what happens, right? We know that the New Orleans Saints basically is going to be in the situation to where they are getting down to that 53-man roster in terms of the initial roster before 3 p.m. Central Time. However, you're going to see a bunch of more moves tomorrow. Players being moved to injured reserve and injured lists, things like that could potentially happen with Trevor Penning, for instance. And then, of course, after that, you'll see other additions happening from players that got cut from other rosters and waiver wires and all these other things. So expect the Saints to be very active over the course of the next couple of days, not just today. Now, yesterday, we sort of switched to our off-season or our regular season mode at the New Orleans Saints facility in terms of observing practices, which means that we get to go for about a 20 to 30 minute window, view, like walk through, stretch, things like that, effectively take attendance and then bring attendance out from that. So I reported yesterday that there were some really nice returns for the New Orleans Saints, like James Hurst and Landon Young, who were both back at practice, which was huge news following, of course, the Trevor Penning news, both of them dealing with injuries in the recent past. Guys like, who else do we have? Adam Troutman and Taysom Hill, Pete Werner, Alontae Taylor, they were all back. Chase Hansen, all back. So it was good to see all those players back, but you didn't see Paulson Adebo or Michael Thomas, and that was a pretty big piece that you're missing there. Now, there were a couple other players that were missing, but we understand why already, right? Traquan Smith had an injury on Friday against the Chargers. Albert Huggins, Malcolm Roach, both had those injuries. Trevor Penning, of course, had his injury. So the next piece that you have to sort of figure out is, what are you looking for in Tuesday's practice? And you're kind of crossing your fingers here and hoping that you see Michael Thomas back. You're hoping that you see Paulson Adebo back. You get those guys back at some point this week, you're in great situation going into next Sunday's game in Atlanta. However, if they're also not back until the beginning of next week, that's also fine, right? So if you don't get them back until the first day that an injury report is being submitted, which would be either Tuesday or Wednesday, then that's also okay. But obviously, the sooner you see them, the better, right? And Michael Thomas was at Demario Davis's 7-on-7 tryouts and everything the other day at the Saints facility, so he looked fine during that. All we got to see was, a little bit of that, though. So we'll have to see exactly what it is that the New Orleans Saints end up doing, right? Taking their time with Michael Thomas, making sure everything's okay. Taking their time with Paulson Adebo, making sure everything's okay. Those are premier players at premier positions. So yeah, you're going to protect like the ever-loving crap out of them, right? You don't want anything to happen to either one of those guys. So it makes a ton of sense. So over the course of the day today, we'll be keeping an eye out on all of the all of the cuts going into the 53-man roster as that begins to take shape. And then over the next couple of days, we'll keep an eye on all of the signing as well. The chat is lit. I appreciate y'all so much. So we'll be keeping up to date with all of that. Later on today, day, I'll have another pre-published or pre-recorded episode where I'll answer a couple of questions. And then, of course, I'll also dive into the 53-man roster, because it should be, the initial roster at least, should be set by the time that I record that. So I'll bring that to you later on tonight, and then we'll be live again tomorrow morning. So I appreciate y'all, as always, for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints and for making us a part of your day. For everything else that you need in terms of your second listen today, make sure you go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast, Locked On Dynasty Football. Get yourself ready for your fantasy football season. So I appreciate you, as always, for making me a part of your day, making me a part of your routine, saying yes to me and the show, and, of course, for joining us here on another live episode of Locked On Saints. Once again, when you see me, as always, feel free to say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.